I first noticed the world resetting on a random Tuesday. At least it was Tuesday to me. Everyone else thought it was Monday. Again. At exactly 12 a.m., reality glitched. Not like a sci-fi movie where the world pixelates and reboots, but in an eerily quiet way. One moment I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and the next, I was sitting at my desk, my clock reading 6:47 a.m. The same alarm buzzed. The same news played on my phone. The same day had started over. At first, I dismissed it. Maybe I had a weirdly specific case of déjà vu. But then it happened again. And again. And again. Everyone around me remained oblivious. They laughed at the same jokes. They made the same choices. No one remembered what happened the day before. Because for them, it never had. But I remembered. And as the resets continued, I started noticing patterns. After the 10th reset, I decided to test the world. I walked up to my coworker, Josh, at our morning meeting and finished his sentence before he could speak. "Dude, how did you know I was going to say that?" he asked, laughing. "Lucky guess," I lied. But inside I felt a chill. It was proof. The world wasn't real. Or at least, it wasn't functioning the way it should. Then I tried changing things. I knocked over my coffee mug. Next reset, it was back where it started. I left work early. Next reset, I was still at my desk at 9 a.m. sharp. I sent myself a message. Next reset, it was gone. Nothing stuck. Nothing carried over. Except me. And that's when I saw it for the first time. A countdown. Hidden in my phone's system logs. Buried in the metadata of every file. It had been decreasing every reset. From 28 to 27 to 26. When it hit 0, what would happen? By reset number 20, I wasn't alone anymore. Someone else knew. I saw him in the background of my resets. A man in a black coat, standing at the edge of my vision. Always just far enough away that I couldn't make out his face. One night, I decided to confront him. As the world counted down to its midnight reset, I ran towards him. He didn't move. He just watched. And just before the world blinked back to 6:47 a.m., I heard him whisper one thing. "It's not a countdown. It's a warning." Now the countdown is at 1. One more reset. One more day before something changes. I don't know what happens when it reaches 0. I don't know if I'll wake up tomorrow. But I know one thing for sure. I'm not supposed to be here. And neither is he. Midnight arrived, and this time, the world didn't reset. The alarm didn't chime at 6:47 a.m. The same news didn't play. My coffee mug remained exactly where I left it. For the first time in 28 days, something was different. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Welcome to day 1. My hands trembled as I typed back. "Who are you?" No response. But as I looked outside, I noticed something chilling. The streets were empty. No cars. No people. The world had reset so many times and now it had stopped. Frozen. The only thing moving was a figure in the distance. The man in the black coat. I stepped outside. He turned his head slowly, locking eyes with me for the first time. "You wanted to know what happens after the countdown, didn't you?" he said. I nodded, unable to speak. His lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "Then let's begin." The man in the black coat stepped closer, his every movement deliberate, as if he was part of some intricate dance. I stood frozen, the chill of his presence crawling up my spine. I wanted to speak, to ask 1,000 questions, but the words stuck in my throat. "You're the last one," he said, his voice low, almost soothing, but with an edge that made every syllable feel like a threat. "The world has reset countless times, but you're the anomaly." I took a tentative step forward, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean, the anomaly?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around, as if searching for something. Finally, his gaze landed on me again. "You didn't follow the rules. Everyone else is just part of the reset. They don't see the clock counting down. They don't remember. But you do. You've been playing this game for 28 resets. And now it's time to face the consequences." I tried to ignore the growing unease that wrapped itself around my thoughts. Consequences? What game? What happens now? He smiled, but it wasn't reassuring. "The world as you know it is only a simulation. A loop. A repetition. But it's not infinite. When the clock hits 0, the reset ends. And everything that's been broken, like you, will have to make its choice. I didn't know what he meant. What choice? He tilted his head, as if considering the weight of his next words. Stay in the reset. Return to the loop. Or leave. But leaving comes at a price. I stepped back, confusion and panic swirling inside me. Leave? To where? There's nowhere left. He gave a dark chuckle, the sound echoing through the empty streets. You'll find out soon enough. The air around us thickened, as if the very fabric of the world was bending, stretching, ready to tear apart at any moment. In the distance, I saw the same flickering of light I had noticed during every reset. The way reality seemed to shimmer, as if it wasn't quite solid. I had always thought it was just a glitch, but now, I knew it was something else. Something bigger. The man in the black coat raised his hand, and suddenly, the ground beneath us began to tremble. You've seen the countdown, he continued, his voice turning more serious. But it's not the only timer. The reset was meant to test you, to see if you could break free. But now the real test begins. I could feel the weight of his words settling over me, a suffocating pressure that made my chest tighten. What test? What do I have to do? His eyes glinted as he turned his back to me, taking a few steps towards the edge of the street. Survive. Find the other anomalies. There are more like you. And together, you'll face the end of the reset. Or, you'll fail. And everything will start again. But this time it will be different. The world will never reset again, not for you. Not for anyone. Before I could ask him anything else, the ground beneath us cracked open, sending a shockwave through the streets. The city, once frozen in place, began to stir as if waking from a long slumber. People who hadn't moved for what felt like days suddenly started walking, as if nothing had ever happened. But I could tell. I could feel the change. It wasn't the same. The man turned back, his eyes locked onto mine. This is your chance, your only chance. The countdown has ended. And now you begin. Before I could react, the ground split further, revealing a dark, twisting void beneath us. Go, he said softly. And then I fell. The fall felt endless, the darkness swallowing me whole as I plummeted deeper into the void. My stomach lurched, and for a moment, I thought I might lose consciousness. But somehow, I remained awake, acutely aware of the cold, the pressure building around me. It was as if the very air was rejecting my existence. I reached out, instinctively grasping for something, anything to slow my descent, but there was nothing. No walls. No ground. Just an infinite chasm that stretched out into oblivion. I felt like I was falling through time itself, the seconds and minutes blending together in a blur. And then, just as the darkness seemed to close in around me completely, the world shifted. A sudden, sharp jerk yanked me forward, pulling me from the void and thrusting me into a new reality. I landed hard on the ground, my body slamming into cold, wet concrete. My limbs screamed in protest, but I pushed myself to my feet, disoriented and gasping for breath. The world around me was eerily quiet. The air smelled like damp earth and old wood, the kind of smell that came from forgotten places. When I finally managed to focus, I realized I wasn't in the city anymore. The familiar skyline had been replaced by towering, decaying buildings that stretched into the fog above me. The streets were empty, like a forgotten ghost town, except for the strange hum that echoed through the air. It felt like I had stepped into a different dimension, a place that existed in the space between realities. I looked around, trying to make sense of my surroundings. The world was as desolate as it was unfamiliar, with cracked pavement and rusted street signs. It looked like an abandoned version of the city I knew, but everything was twisted. There were no people, no signs of life, just the cold remnants of a forgotten world. As I stumbled forward, my mind raced. What had just happened? Where was I? And most importantly, why was I here? The man in the black coat had said something about anomalies, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was supposed to find them. But where did I even start? How was I supposed to survive in a place like this? Then from somewhere ahead, I heard a sound, a faint scraping, like metal dragging across concrete. It was distant, but it sent a shiver down my spine. Cautiously, I crept forward, my heart pounding in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but something pushed me forward. The scraping grew louder as I rounded a corner. And that's when I saw it. A figure hunched over, dragging something heavy behind them. They were moving slowly, deliberately, like they were weighed down by the world itself. I couldn't see their face, only their silhouette against the foggy backdrop of the crumbling city. The figure stopped suddenly, as if sensing my presence, and turned to face me. I froze. The figure didn't move, but its posture was unnerving, as if it was waiting for something. I could feel its gaze, even though I couldn't see its eyes. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice barely more than a whisper, afraid to break the silence that seemed to stretch endlessly around us. The figure didn't respond. Instead, they slowly reached into their coat and pulled out something. A small, glinting object. A key. Without a word, the figure tossed the key in my direction. It landed in the dirt at my feet, the dull clink of metal on concrete echoing in the quiet. I stared at the key, unsure of what it meant. Was it a message? A warning? Or was it simply the next step in some twisted game I couldn't yet understand? The figure slowly began to retreat, dragging their heavy burden behind them once more, fading into the fog. I picked up the key, my fingers trembling as I turned it over in my hand. It felt heavy, significant, like it held the answer to a question I hadn't yet asked. But what did it unlock? I had no way of knowing. But something told me that this key was the first real clue, a piece of the puzzle that had led me to this place. And somewhere, deep in the fog-shrouded streets, there was an answer waiting for me. I just had to find it. And I wasn't alone in this world anymore. Something else was out there watching me. And it wasn't just the man in the black coat. I tucked the key into my pocket, its weight a constant reminder that I was no longer in control. The fog had thickened since the figure disappeared, enveloping everything in a soft, oppressive veil. The air was damp, and with each step I took, the sound of my boots striking the wet ground was the only thing that broke the eerie silence. I had no idea where to go next, but the key burned in my pocket, urging me forward. It felt as though the world itself was waiting for me to take the next step, to solve the puzzle it had set before me. But where could I possibly begin? A distant scream shattered the stillness, sending a jolt of fear through me. It was unmistakable, the sound of a person in pain. My first instinct was to run, to flee in the opposite direction, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was somehow connected to the strange new reality I had found myself in. I followed the sound, moving cautiously, listening for any other signs of life. The city, if you could still call it that, seemed endless, its twisted streets looping back on themselves, leading nowhere. It was as if the entire place was designed to disorient, to trap anyone who ventured too far from the familiar. The scream came again, louder this time, more desperate. It was close. I turned a corner and froze. A group of people stood in the middle of the street, their faces obscured by shadows, their forms barely visible in the fog. They were staring at something in front of them, their eyes wide with fear. There were 5 of them, 2 men, 3 women, dressed in mismatched clothes, as if they had been pulled from different times and places. None of them seemed to notice me. They were watching a woman kneeling in the middle of the street, her body trembling. She was clutching her chest, gasping for breath, as if she couldn't breathe in the air around her. Her eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth moved soundlessly, as if begging for help. I stepped closer, trying not to make a sound, but the moment my foot hit the ground, one of the figures turned to face me. A man tall and gaunt, his face pale as if drained of color, stared at me with an intense gaze. His mouth didn't move, but somehow, I heard his voice in my mind. "You're not supposed to be here." The words were quiet, but they carried an undeniable weight. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What's happening here?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked over his shoulder at the others, as if deciding whether to say more. Then he finally spoke. "We're anomalies. Just like you." His eyes narrowed, studying me intently. "You're the last one. The one who's remembered. The one who's survived all the resets." "Anomalies?" I repeated, still struggling to process what was happening. "What does that mean? What's going on?" The woman on the ground gasped again, her breath ragged. One of the others moved toward her, but the tall man stopped them with a raised hand. "It's not your turn," he said, his voice colder than before. "We've all been through this. Each of us has been given a chance to break free, to find our way out. But not everyone survives." I looked down at the woman, her body shaking violently now. "What happened to her?" "She's failed," the man said simply, his tone flat, almost detached. "The test." My heart pounded. "What test?" The woman's eyes locked onto mine, her face pleading, her lips forming words I couldn't hear. But there was something in her gaze, something that screamed for help. And then, with a horrifying suddenness, her body went still. She collapsed, her form lifeless, as if her soul had simply slipped away. The others remained motionless, their expressions unchanged, as though they had seen this happen countless times before. I staggered back, my stomach churning. "No. What is this place? What do you want from me?" The tall man stepped forward, his gaze never leaving mine. "You've made it this far, but you're not done. There are more like you anomalies. Each of us has a key. Each of us holds a piece of the puzzle. You have to find the others. You have to survive. But most of all, you have to remember." I shook my head. "Remember what?" His lips twisted into a thin smile. "What comes next?" Before I could ask anything more, a low rumble echoed through the ground beneath us. The others turned, as if sensing something I couldn't yet see. The fog thickened, swirling around us, and the once silent city came to life with an unsettling creak and groan, as if the buildings themselves were waking from a long, unnatural sleep. The tall man stepped backward, his hand raising in a gesture I couldn't quite understand. "It's time." And just like that, they vanished. The fog swallowed them whole, leaving me standing alone in the street, the weight of their words heavy in my mind. I was left with more questions than answers. The woman's body remained on the ground lifeless, her last plea for help still echoing in my ears. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the key. It was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly as if alive. This was just the beginning. The test wasn't over. And somewhere in this broken city, I would find the answers. I didn't waste time. I had to move. There was no point in standing still, not now. The city was alive with something dark and wrong, and I couldn't shake the feeling that every corner I turned would reveal more horrors, more unanswered questions. The key in my pocket burned against my skin, an incessant reminder that I was far from safe. I stepped over the woman's lifeless body, her blank eyes staring at nothing, and continued down the fog-choked street. The hum in the air seemed to vibrate through the ground, growing louder with every step I took. It felt like the city itself was alive, watching me, waiting for me to make my next move. The streets twisted unnaturally, leading me in circles, always back to where I started. I began to feel like I was trapped in some kind of maze with no escape. The buildings around me, once decaying and forgotten, now seemed to lean inwards, as if the walls themselves were closing in. I stopped at an intersection and looked around. There had to be a way out. There had to be some clue, some sign, to point me in the right direction. The fog swirled in front of me, and for a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing in the mist. A silhouette barely visible, but unmistakable. It was another anomaly. I could feel it. I moved toward the figure, my footsteps slow and deliberate. As I approached, the mist parted slightly, revealing a man. He was dressed in a dark suit, his hair disheveled, and his face marked with exhaustion. He looked like he had been here far too long, the weight of this place wearing him down. "Are you one of us?" I asked, cautiously approaching him. The man didn't respond immediately. His eyes darted to the key in my hand, and I could see recognition flicker in his gaze. Without a word, he held up his hand, revealing a key identical to mine. I swallowed hard. "You're like me?" He nodded, his expression grim. "Anomalies," he said, his voice hoarse. "We're the ones who remember. The ones who break the rules. And we're not supposed to be here." "What happens to us?" I asked, feeling a chill creep up my spine. "Survival," he replied. "We survive by finding the others, by unlocking the pieces of the puzzle, and by making a choice." I looked down at my key again, the weight of it now almost unbearable. "What choice?" He took a deep breath, looking around as though making sure we were alone. "It's the final step," he said, his eyes haunted. "The reset is just the beginning. What comes after is worse. The key you're holding, It's a key to something beyond this place. A way out. But you have to choose who gets to leave. I frowned, confused. What do you mean? We all get to leave, right? We all survive. He shook his head slowly. It's not that simple. One of us gets to leave. The rest stay. The air around us seemed to grow colder, the fog swirling faster, as if reacting to his words. What happens to the ones who stay? He didn't answer right away, his gaze distant, as though he had already seen what came next. They become part of the reset. They're lost, forgotten. And the cycle starts over. I felt a wave of nausea hit me. No, I can't be a part of that. You don't have a choice. He met my gaze now, his eyes dark with understanding. You never did. Before I could process what he had said, a loud crash echoed through the street, followed by a low growl. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the fog thickened even more, making it nearly impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. What is that? I asked, my voice rising with panic. Something's coming, the man said, his voice barely above a whisper. And it's not just the reset we have to worry about anymore. It's them. He grabbed my arm, his grip like iron. We need to move. Now. I didn't hesitate. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest. As we ran down the street, the growls grew louder, closer. I could hear heavy footsteps echoing in the fog, the sound of something massive moving toward us. Something that didn't belong in this world. I looked over at the man, desperate for answers. What are they? Who are they? Hunters, he said, his voice tight with fear. They're the ones who clean up the mess. They're here to make sure no one breaks the cycle. To make sure no one remembers. The ground beneath our feet cracked open, and I stumbled as a tremor shot through the city. The fog swirled violently around us, and I could hear the low growl of the creatures getting closer. I had no idea what was coming for us, but it was clear we had run out of time. The man turned to face me, his expression filled with regret. You have to make your choice. You have the key. Find the others. Unlock what needs to be unlocked. And when the time comes, choose who survives. I didn't have a chance to respond before the city around us seemed to explode with movement. The fog twisted and churned as dark shapes emerged from the mist. Hulking, shadowed figures with eyes that glowed like embers in the dark. The man pushed me toward a nearby alley, urgency in his voice. Run. I didn't need any more encouragement. I turned and sprinted into the alley, heart racing as the sound of the hunter's footsteps reverberated through the narrow street behind me. But even as I ran, I knew one thing for certain. The endgame had begun, and I was about to find out what it meant to be the key holder. The alleyway was narrow, its walls closing in as I ran, the sound of my breath harsh in the thick fog. Behind me, the growls of the hunters echoed, sending waves of fear through me. I had no idea how far they were, or how close they were to catching up. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let them find me. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. I turned a sharp corner and stopped short. The alley dead-ended in a brick wall, and my heart pounded in my chest. The fog swirled around me, thick and suffocating, making it hard to see beyond my own outstretched hand. There was nowhere to go. I spun around, searching for an escape, but the fog closed in too quickly. The hunters were coming. Desperation surged in my chest. I had the key. The only key to ending this. To escaping. But what good was it if I couldn't find a way out? And then, just as I was about to lose hope, I saw it. A door, hidden in the wall, its outline barely visible in the fog. It was as though it had appeared out of nowhere, an impossible hidden passage. Without thinking, I bolted for it. The door creaked open with a low groan as I pushed against it, and I slipped inside just as I heard the first of the hunter's footsteps behind me. The door slammed shut, and I found myself in a dimly lit room. It was small, cramped, but at least it was a place to breathe. I backed away from the door, my chest heaving as I tried to steady my breathing. The air inside was cooler, quieter. I looked around, my eyes slowly adjusting to the dim light. The room was bare, save for a single table in the center. And sitting at the table were 3 figures. They didn't move as I entered, their faces obscured by the shadows. I could feel their eyes on me, though, studying me, judging me. You made it, a voice said, low and calm. It was a woman's voice. We didn't think anyone would. Who are you? I asked, taking a cautious step forward. What is this place? One of the figures stood. A tall man, his face covered in a shadowed hood. We're the others, he said. The ones who didn't give up. The ones who survived the resets. Just like you. I swallowed hard. The others? You mean more anomalies? The woman nodded. You're not the first to be here. And you won't be the last. I looked down at the key in my hand, still pulsing faintly, as if it were alive. So what happens now? Another figure, a younger man, leaned forward in his seat. Now you make a choice. You hold the key. It's yours to unlock what's next. I shook my head. But I don't understand. I thought we were supposed to survive. We were supposed to find a way out. Isn't that what we're doing here? The woman stood, crossing the room in a single fluid motion. Her eyes were hard, filled with something I couldn't quite place. It's not about surviving. It's about what happens when the reset ends. You see, the resets were never meant to help us. They were meant to test us. To see who could make it through, who could survive the cycle. And you, the ones like you, the anomalies, are the ones who remember. The ones who get to decide what happens when everything breaks. I felt a chill race up my spine. What do you mean? What happens when it breaks? Everything changes, the young man said softly. When the cycle finally ends, the world won't be the same. It will be torn apart, reshaped. And the ones who survive will shape its future. You're the key to that change. I turned the key over in my hand, feeling its power thrumming against my skin. But who chooses? Who decides? The woman smiled, though it wasn't a comforting smile. It was something darker. You do. I stared at her, my mind racing. What do you mean by that? I'm not alone. I can't just. You're never alone, she interrupted. But you are the one who holds the key. The others, they're just pieces. You're the one who chooses what happens next. I felt my throat tighten. And if I choose wrong, you'll pay the price, the tall man said coldly. We all will. The air in the room felt heavy now, as if the very walls were closing in. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of their words. There was no way out, no easy choice. I could feel the weight of the key in my hand, its power pressing against me, urging me to make the decision. But I had no idea what the right choice was. How could I choose when I didn't even know the cost? I glanced around at the figures standing before me, their faces still hidden in shadow. How do I know what the right choice is? How do I know what comes next? The woman stepped closer, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. You'll know. The world will show you. You just have to trust that you have the strength to make the right decision. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as I stared at the key, the pulse of its power growing stronger with every passing second. I was standing at the edge of something vast, something unknown, and the weight of the decision ahead of me was enough to crush me. But one thing was certain. I couldn't do this alone. The hunters were still out there, waiting for me. The cycle was still running, and I was still part of it. But if I wanted to break free, if I wanted to survive, I had to make a choice. And I had to make it fast. I gripped the key tightly, feeling its energy surge through me. This was it. The moment of truth. There was no turning back. I stood there, the key heavy in my hand, my pulse echoing through my chest as I fought to comprehend the magnitude of what I was about to face. The figures in the room watched me silently, their faces still obscured by shadows, but their eyes never left me. Their silence only made the pressure mounting on my shoulders feel worse. It was as if they were waiting for me to make a choice they had already anticipated. The weight of the key was unbearable, like it was pressing against my very soul. Every instinct in me screamed that I needed to make the right decision. But how could I? How could anyone possibly know what the right choice was when everything was a blur of chaos and mystery? The woman stepped closer, her movements smooth and deliberate. Her eyes, now visible in the dim light, glowed faintly, and there was an unsettling calm about her. It's not just about the choice itself, she said softly, her voice almost like a whisper in the quiet room. It's about what happens after you choose. The world you choose will no longer be the world you know. It will shift, and you will shift with it. Her words echoed in my mind, and I could feel the air in the room thickening, pressing down on me, urging me to make a decision. The moment stretched on, and the noise of the hunters outside grew louder, their footsteps rhythmic, as if they were closing in. They were waiting for something. Something they had been hunting for. I looked at the key again. It was glowing faintly, the aura around it shimmering as though it were alive. Its power was undeniable, but the truth was, I had no idea what I was supposed to do with it. What was I supposed to unlock? And who would I choose to survive? I glanced around at the others. These fellow anomalies who had survived the resets, who remembered. Each one of them had a look of knowing in their eyes, as if they had already made their choices long ago. But not me. I was still standing on the precipice, unsure whether I was making the right decision. The man with the hood spoke again, his voice low and firm. The hunters are coming, and when they do, there will be no more time for hesitation. The cycle will break, but it will break in ways you cannot anticipate. What you unlock will determine whether you live through it, or if you become part of the reset forever. I shook my head, feeling the pressure of their words weigh down on me. The fog outside was growing thicker, and I could feel the tremors of the ground beneath my feet, as though the world itself was waiting to collapse. You have the power to decide, but it's not just a matter of survival, the woman said, her voice now hard, her eyes locking onto mine. You must decide who deserves to live, who deserves to stay, and who is worthy of shaping the new world. You're the key holder. Your choice is final. I stepped back, my mind racing. How could I possibly make a decision like this? How could I choose? There were people here. People who had been through the resets. People who had fought alongside me. And yet, how could I choose which of them would survive the impending collapse of this world? Choose wisely, the tall man said. Because if you fail, if you choose wrong, everything will be lost. The hunters, the reset, the world, it will all be gone. The room fell silent again. The air felt colder, the tension so thick it was almost suffocating. I could hear the faint sounds of the hunters in the distance, their growls echoing through the fog as they closed in. There was no more time to deliberate. I had to make my choice. I turned to face the door, feeling its presence like an ominous shadow. I could hear the creaking of the floorboards, the distant rumbles of the hunters, and in that moment I understood. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about what I was going to survive for. I could feel the key pulling me toward the door, as though it were urging me to unlock whatever lay beyond. The door shimmered with a strange energy, and I could almost see through it, into another world, a new reality. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle into my bones. My fingers tightened around the key, and I slowly walked toward the door. The others watched me, their eyes filled with a mixture of anticipation and fear. They had made their peace with the situation, but I hadn't. Not yet. But in that moment I realized something. I didn't have to choose who would survive or who would stay behind. What I had to do was open the door. To break the cycle once and for all. The reset would end. But it wouldn't be because of who I chose. It would be because I chose to unlock a new world, a new beginning. I raised the key, feeling its power surge through me. And with a trembling hand, I pressed it into the lock. The door opened. And everything changed. As the door swung open, a blinding light filled the room. For a moment, I thought I had made a mistake, that I had chosen the wrong path, and that I was about to be swallowed by the darkness of the unknown. But then, the light began to settle, and I realized that I wasn't standing in darkness anymore. The world had changed. I blinked, my senses reeling as I took in the sight before me. Gone were the fog-choked streets, the broken city, and the shadowy figures that had haunted me. Instead, I found myself standing in a vast open landscape. The sky above me was bright and clear, the sun shining down in a way I hadn't seen in what felt like forever. This wasn't the world I had known. This was something entirely new. The others stepped through the door behind me, their expressions a mix of awe and disbelief. They, too, were taking in the sight of this new world, as though they had just been freed from a nightmare that had plagued them for so long. And then I understood. The key had unlocked more than just a door. It had unlocked the possibility of a new reality. I didn't know what the future would hold in this new world. I didn't know what challenges lay ahead. But one thing was certain. We had been given a second chance. And this time, the cycle wouldn't repeat. I turned back to the others, my heart finally at peace. The reset was over. The world had been changed. And we were free. For now. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the vast new world we found ourselves in. The landscape stretched far beyond what I could see. Rolling hills, dense forests, and strange, unfamiliar creatures that roamed the fields. It was beautiful, too beautiful in fact. It felt almost unreal. We had stepped through the door, but what had we truly stepped into? Was this a new beginning? Or had we simply jumped into another kind of trap? I looked around at the others. These survivors who had walked with me through the resets, who had come this far with me. We were all alive. We had broken the cycle, we had shattered the reset. And yet something gnawed at me. The world around us seemed too perfect, too calm. There were no shadows lurking in the corners. No unknown dangers lurking just beyond the horizon. It was peaceful. Too peaceful. I felt the weight of the key still in my pocket. A reminder of what I had unlocked. It pulsed softly, almost like it was calling to me. But I couldn't bring myself to look at it. Not yet. One of the figures, an older woman, whose name I still hadn't learned, stepped forward, gazing at the horizon. It's hard to believe it's over. After everything we've been through, I thought we'd be trapped forever. I nodded, though doubt still lingered in my chest. But are we really free? Can we trust that this world is real? The man with the hood, the one who had been the most silent among us, spoke up, his voice grim. Real? I don't know. But we're here now. And that has to count for something. His words struck me harder than I expected. We were here. But were we here because we had earned it? Or because we were being given a chance to play by new rules? The silence that followed hung heavy over the group, everyone deep in their own thoughts. We were survivors, each of us scarred by the resets, marked by the experiences we had shared. But now, we had no clear direction. No purpose except the vague hope that this world was where we could truly live without fear. I began to walk forward, the others following me, drawn by the same uncertainty. The same question that hovered over our heads like a dark cloud. What now? As we trekked further into the new world, the landscape began to shift. The rolling hills and dense forests started to give way to tall, imposing structures. Buildings that loomed over us, half collapsed and worn with age. Something was wrong. The world, it seemed, was beginning to crack. The calm beauty was slowly giving way to something darker. Something that felt familiar. I stopped, a chill crawling down my spine. I glanced back at the group, who had noticed the change too. The once vibrant sky above us now seemed tainted, the clouds darkening. The air grew heavier, as though the atmosphere itself was closing in. What is this? One of the survivors asked, voice trembling. Is it happening again? Another whispered, fear creeping into their tone. I looked at the key again, its pulse growing faster, more insistent. The world was shifting, changing before my eyes, and I realized with a sinking feeling that the reset had never truly ended. I had been so focused on escaping the cycle, on unlocking a new reality, that I hadn't considered this. The key wasn't just a way out. It was a key to something far more dangerous. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the buildings in the distance began to sway. The sky cracked open and dark, swirling clouds poured out from the breach. It's not over, I muttered to myself, panic rising in my chest. It can't be. Suddenly, the hunters appeared. Only they were not the same figures I had seen before. These were different, more monstrous, with eyes glowing like burning coals and jagged teeth that seemed to stretch unnaturally wide. They were everywhere, emerging from the cracks in the world, surrounding us with an inescapable presence. What is this? I shouted, stepping back. What did I do? The woman, the one who had spoken earlier, looked at me with wide eyes. The world isn't reset because of the key. It's reset by the key. And now, we're trapped in a loop of our own making. I felt a sickening twist in my gut. The hunters were here to claim us, to keep us from escaping the cycle we had never truly broken. We weren't free. We were stuck in a never-ending spiral, one that had been set into motion the moment we opened the door. Do you see it now? The tall man with the hood said, his voice resigned. The price of freedom is this. We were never meant to escape. The reset is a part of the world. The key, it's the catalyst. I stood frozen, staring at the hunters that circled us, their eyes burning with hunger. The world was collapsing around us. Everything we had fought for unraveling before our eyes. We weren't in control. We had only delayed the inevitable. The woman who had spoken earlier took a step toward me, her face somber. You have to make a choice now. You have to decide whether you'll accept the world as it is or face the truth. The reset can't be broken. You can't escape it. I swallowed hard. The key pulsed again, its energy tugging at my very soul, urging me to make a decision. Then what do we do? I asked, my voice shaking. We survive, she said softly. We survive and we fight. As the hunters closed in, their grotesque forms now just feet away, I knew there was no way out. The world had reset once again, and all we could do now was survive. The key had given us a chance. But now we had to find a way to fight for what little we had left. And this time it wasn't about escaping. It was about surviving the reset, whatever it took. The cycle wasn't over. It had only just begun. The air crackled with tension as the hunters closed in, their unnatural eyes fixed on us. The ground beneath my feet trembled, as if the very earth was groaning under the weight of the reset. I could feel the presence of the key in my pocket, its pulse growing stronger, more insistent. It was as if the key itself was urging me to act, to do something before the hunters consumed us all. The survivors, the few of us left, were now surrounded, huddling together in a loose circle. I could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear I felt deep in my chest. We had escaped the resets before, but this time it was different. There was no door to open, no countdown to stop. This time, we were facing the consequence of our actions. We were facing a reality that had been distorted beyond repair. One of the survivors, a man with a scar across his cheek, gripped his weapon, a crude staff he had fashioned from a broken piece of wood. His eyes were wild, desperate. We can't just stand here. We have to fight back. I looked at the key again, still pulsing with energy, and I knew that we didn't have much time left. The hunters were closing in, and their monstrous forms were growing larger, more terrifying with each passing second. We can't fight them, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We're not ready. They're too powerful. The woman who had spoken earlier, the one who seemed to understand more than the rest of us, stepped forward, her face resolute. The key isn't just for unlocking doors. It's for unlocking potential, for unlocking power. Her words struck me like a lightning bolt, and I turned to look at her, my mind racing. What do you mean? The key has given us a chance, she said, her voice steady, but filled with an underlying urgency. It's unlocked a new world, yes, but it has also unlocked something within us. We have the power to change this, to fight back. I could feel it now, a surge of energy coursing through me. The key was alive with possibility, and it was as though the world itself was bending to my will, responding to the power I had yet to fully understand. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as the air around us shifted, dark clouds swirling above. Use the key, she urged, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. It's not just about survival. It's about fighting for what we've lost. We have to take control before the reset consumes us all. I didn't hesitate. I reached for the key in my pocket, gripping it tightly in my hand. The moment I touched it, I felt a rush of power, a surge of energy that seemed to flow from the very core of the earth itself. It was as if the key was unlocking something deep within me, something I had never known existed. The hunters stopped moving, as if sensing the shift in the air. Their eyes flickered with confusion, their growls growing more frantic as they tried to understand what was happening. I could hear the whispers in my mind, the voices of the key urging me forward. It wasn't enough just to survive anymore. It was time to take action, time to end the cycle once and for all. With a deep breath, I raised the key, holding it high above my head. The world around me seemed to bend and twist, as if reality itself was responding to the power I was unlocking. And then I spoke. Enough. The word reverberated through the air, vibrating with the energy of the key. The hunters faltered, their twisted forms shuddering, as though they were being pulled back, repelled by an unseen force. The ground beneath our feet cracked open, and the sky above us darkened even further. But there was something different now. Something powerful. Something that wasn't just fear, but defiance. The woman stepped beside me, her voice steady as she spoke the words I needed to hear. We're not just survivors anymore. We're the ones who hold the power. We decide how this world will end. and it will end on our terms. The hunters screamed, their hideous forms writhing and contorting as they were torn apart by the energy I had unleashed. I could see them being pulled back, fading into nothingness as the power of the key consumed them. But even as they disappeared, I knew the world wasn't fully safe. The key had unlocked something, yes, but it had also created a new danger. The reset hadn't just been a cycle. It was a force that would stop at nothing to reclaim what it had lost. We had won this battle, but the war was far from over. We can't stay here, I said, my voice filled with determination. We have to keep moving. The reset will try to come for us again. The others nodded, their faces grim but resolute. We had no choice but to keep going, to keep fighting. The key had given us power, but it also came with a price. And the price was that we would never be free of the cycle. We could only fight against it one reset at a time. As we moved forward into the strange, shifting world, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead. The reset hadn't been broken. It had only been delayed. But now we had something the reset could never take away: the will to fight. And that would have to be enough. We continued our journey through the altered world, never stopping for long, never letting our guard down. The survivors were no longer just passive participants in this twisted reality. We were soldiers in an ongoing war against a force that was far older and more powerful than we could comprehend. The key pulsed in my pocket, a constant reminder of the power we had unlocked. But I knew it wasn't enough. The reset would return, stronger than ever, and it would come for us again. It had already begun. In the distance, I saw the sky fracture once more, like glass splintering under immense pressure. The world was beginning to break apart at the seams, and I knew that the true battle was only just beginning. We had only scratched the surface of what was to come. The reckoning had arrived. The ground beneath our feet shuddered as the fractures in the sky widened, splitting like cracks in glass. The air grew thick with an unnatural tension, a palpable weight that pressed against us, forcing us to stop in our tracks. I could feel the power of the key growing stronger, its pulse matching the frantic rhythm of my heart. Whatever force was driving the reset was nearing its peak, and I knew we didn't have much time left. We need to find shelter, the older woman said, her voice urgent. It's coming. The reset will tear everything apart if we don't find a way to stop it. I nodded, but a sinking feeling in my chest told me that stopping it might not even be possible anymore. The key had granted us power, yes, but it had also bound us to this never-ending cycle. This war against something we barely understood. The others were already moving, their eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of refuge. The landscape around us had grown increasingly hostile. The once lush fields now filled with jagged rocks and twisted trees that seemed to lean toward us with an unnatural hunger. In the distance, the sky was now a swirling vortex of black and violet, as if the world itself were being devoured by some ancient force. Where do we go? A man named Derek asked, his voice strained. Where can we hide from this? There's no hiding from it, I replied, my voice barely a whisper. The reset doesn't work like that. It'll find us no matter where we go. The woman turned to face me, her eyes full of concern. Then what do? We can't just stand here and let it consume us. I looked down at the key in my hand, still pulsing with energy, but now it felt different. The weight of it seemed to press against my very soul, as though it were trying to tell me something. It wasn't just a tool to escape the cycle. It was a part of it, a key to the reset itself. It's not about survival anymore, I said slowly, as the realization hit me. We're not supposed to escape. We're supposed to face the reset. We have to break it from the inside. The woman stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a small nod, she turned and addressed the others. We're not running. We're fighting. This is our world now, and we're going to make it ours. But even as she spoke, I knew the battle was already lost. The reset was no longer something we could fight against. It was a force of nature, and we were mere ants struggling against the tide. Suddenly, the ground shook violently, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. A massive, shadowy figure appeared in the distance, its form barely visible against the swirling chaos of the sky. It was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen. Its shape was constantly shifting, as though it were made of smoke and shadow. its eyes burning with an unholy fire. "The reset," the woman whispered, her voice filled with dread. "It's here." The creature loomed closer, its massive form blotting out the sky as it moved toward us. I could feel the key pulsing in my hand, its energy now a constant hum that vibrated through my entire body. The reset had come to claim us. But we were not going to go down without a fight. "Get ready," I shouted to the others, my voice rising above the noise of the collapsing world. "We have one chance. We have to strike before it reaches us." The others took their positions, gripping makeshift weapons and standing their ground. There was no more running, no more hiding. We had to face the reset head-on. The creature moved closer, its form growing larger and more menacing. Its eyes locked onto me, and I could feel the weight of its gaze, as though it could see directly into my soul. And then it spoke. "You think you can break me? You think you can escape?" Its voice was a whisper, yet it reverberated through the air, shaking me to my core. I knew in that moment that this wasn't just a creature. It was the embodiment of the reset itself, the force that had shaped the world, that had bound us to this never-ending cycle. "I am the reset," it continued, its voice echoing like a chorus of 1,000 whispers. "I am the beginning and the end. You cannot fight what you are bound to." The words sent a chill down my spine, but I didn't hesitate. I raised the key high above my head, the energy within it crackling and sparking as I focused all my will into it. The key responded to my command, glowing brighter and brighter until it became a blinding light, piercing the darkness that surrounded us. "Then I'll make you break," I said, my voice steady despite the fear threatening to consume me. The world around us seemed to pause as the key's energy surged, crackling through the air like lightning. The reset creature screamed, its form writhing in agony as the energy of the key clashed with it. But the force it wielded was overwhelming. The creature's form began to shift and multiply, splitting into hundreds of smaller, twisted versions of itself, each more terrifying than the last. "We have to destroy it," I shouted. "We have to destroy the source." The woman stepped forward, raising her weapon and charging at the closest of the creatures. The others followed suit, attacking with whatever they could find. But no matter how many we struck down, the reset was endless. It was everywhere. I turned back to the key, desperation flooding through me. "Please," I whispered, "help us." The key pulsed again, stronger this time. And as its energy surged, I realized what it had been trying to show me all along. The key wasn't just a weapon. It was a tool for creation and destruction, a force that could reshape reality itself. I closed my eyes, concentrating on the energy flowing through me. I could feel the reset creature's presence, could feel its very essence. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I had to rewrite the world. With a final decisive thought, I thrust the key into the ground, releasing all the energy it contained. The world exploded in a blinding flash of light. When the light faded, everything was still. The hunters, the creatures, the reset itself, everything had vanished. The world had stopped collapsing. And for the first time, I felt the weight of silence settle over me. The key had done it. It had rewritten the world. But as I stood there, breathing heavily, I knew this wasn't over. The reset had been stopped for now. But the cycle was eternal. It would return, and we would face it again. The question was, would we be ready? We would have to be, because the reset was not done with us. Not by a long shot. The world was silent. The ground was still, the air thick with an eerie calm that felt unnatural after everything that had transpired. The dust of destruction settled around us, and for the first time, there was no noise. No monsters, no threats, no hunters. The fractures in the sky had healed. The rift that had torn the world apart now sealed. I stood in the center of it all, my hand still gripping the key, now a dim, lifeless object in my palm. The power it had once pulsed with had faded, leaving me empty and exhausted. The weight of everything that had happened, the resets, the battles, the loss, pressed on me like a heavy cloak. It was over. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. But something didn't feel right. I turned to look at the others. The survivors were scattered around the area, each of them in various states of shock and disbelief. Some were kneeling, some standing, their eyes wide as they took in the world around them. The devastation was gone, but it had left its mark. "We did it," Derek said, his voice hoarse, but filled with relief. We actually did it. The woman who had stood beside me throughout this nightmare, Sarah, looked up at the sky, her eyes narrowed. I don't think it's over, she said, her voice carrying a note of caution. The reset might be gone for now, but I can feel it. Something's coming. Something we haven't seen yet. I frowned. I knew what she meant. The world felt too quiet. Too still. Like a moment before a storm. It was as if the reset had simply taken a step back, as though waiting for the right time to return. And that feeling deep in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't over. I don't understand, I said, my voice low. We stopped the reset. We stopped the cycle. Why isn't this over? Sarah turned to me, her gaze hardening. Because it's not just the reset that we're fighting. It's the system behind it. The force that created all of this, that manipulates time, reality, and existence itself. We may have stopped the reset for now, but we haven't destroyed what created it. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had known there was more to the reset, something far more sinister. But hearing Sarah say it aloud brought the truth crashing down on me. The key was never just a weapon, she continued. It was a way to break through, to uncover the layers of reality that were hidden beneath. And now that we've broken through, we can see the cracks in the system. But those cracks, they're not just going to disappear. What do we do now? Derek asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Sarah glanced around at the others, her eyes narrowing. We have to prepare. The reset won't go down quietly. It will adapt. And when it returns, we'll need to be ready. A cold shiver ran through me. I had been so sure that this was the end, that we had finally broken the cycle. But now I realized that the reset wasn't just an event. It was a system that could adapt, evolve, and return stronger than ever. There's a deeper layer to this world, Sarah said, her voice almost a whisper. One that we haven't even begun to understand. And until we uncover all of it, until we break the system completely, we're not free. I turned toward the others, seeing their faces filled with uncertainty. They were tired. They were broken. And I couldn't blame them. We had been through so much. And now, it seemed like the real fight was just beginning. Then we keep moving, I said, my voice steady, though doubt lingered in the corners of my mind. We keep going, and we figure this out. We can't stop now. Not after everything we've been through. Sarah nodded, a flicker of hope in her eyes. We've come this far. We can't let it win now. We gathered together, our resolve hardening in the face of the unknown. The reset might have been pushed back, but the real enemy had yet to reveal itself. The system that had created this twisted reality still lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting for its next move. As we walked forward into the unknown, I couldn't shake the feeling that the true battle was yet to come. The reset was just a symptom, a consequence of something far larger, far more terrifying. And we had to confront it, before it consumed everything. The dawn of a new cycle was upon us. And this time there would be no escape. We had wandered for what felt like days, though time had lost its meaning since the resets had begun. The world around us had returned to some semblance of normalcy, but it was a normalcy that felt too fragile, too artificial. The land was calm, the sky clear, and the air fresh. But in my gut, I could feel the impending doom, a sense of dread that gnawed at me, like a presence lurking just beyond the horizon. We had made camp near an old, crumbling structure, what looked like the remnants of an ancient civilization. The architecture was unlike anything I had seen before, as if it had been built by beings who understood the true fabric of reality. The walls were etched with strange symbols, and the air hummed with an energy that felt ancient, unfamiliar. This place feels wrong, Derek muttered, his eyes scanning the ruins warily. I know, I said, my voice low. But we have no choice. We need to find answers. Sarah stepped forward, studying the symbols on the walls. Her fingers traced over them gently, as if she recognized something hidden within them. These symbols, she said, her voice trembling slightly. They're not just decorative. They're part of the system, part of the code that holds everything together. The code, I repeated, confused. The code that holds the world, the resets, the very fabric of existence itself, Sarah explained. The symbols are a key, a way to unlock the truth of what's really happening here. I felt a chill run down my spine as she spoke. What truth? That we're not just part of some endless loop, she said softly. We're part of a grand experiment. An experiment that was designed to test the limits of human existence. And we've been chosen to be its subjects. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Chosen? Sarah nodded. We're the final test. The last survivors in a world that has been engineered to break and rebuild itself. And the reset, it's just the beginning. The system was designed to see how we would respond to this, to see if we could break free. But we haven't broken free. We've only been allowed to think we did. I looked at the others, their faces filled with confusion and fear. But I couldn't deny what Sarah was saying. The world had never felt real, not truly. The resets we thought we had defeated, they were just one layer of a much larger construct. The reset is only a part of the system. It's been testing us, Sarah said. And now, we're about to face the final phase of the experiment. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. The reset had been a trial, a test of our will, our survival, our ability to adapt. And the true enemy, the force that controlled everything, was still out there watching us. The final revelation hit me like a thunderclap. We weren't just fighting for our lives. We were fighting for reality itself. And the key had only just begun to unlock the truth. The weight of the truth hung over us, a suffocating presence that threatened to crush everything we had fought for. We weren't just pawns in some twisted game. We were the final experiment, the culmination of a cycle designed to test humanity's limits. And whatever force controlled the reset, whatever created this system, it had been watching us every step of the way. I stared at the symbols etched into the crumbling walls of the ancient structure, each one pulsing with a faint, almost imperceptible glow. Sarah had said these were the key to unlocking the truth behind the reset, behind the system that had enslaved us for so long. But what if the truth was more than we could bear? How do we stop it? I asked, my voice tight. How do we break free from this experiment? Sarah shook her head slowly. I don't know, but we can't keep running from it. We have to face it head on. We've been given a choice, whether we realize it or not. We've been given the ability to shape our own fate. The key, the resets, this world, it's all part of the test. And the final phase is coming. I could feel the pulse of energy from the symbols, like the heartbeat of some ancient machine, a mechanism that had been operating long before we even existed. The deeper I looked, the more I realized the truth Sarah had uncovered. It wasn't just us against the reset. It was us against something far older, far more powerful than anything we had imagined. Derek stepped forward, his face grim. And if we fail, what happens then? We don't want to find out, Sarah said, her voice hardening. But we're out of time. The reset is coming back, and when it does, it will be stronger. We have one chance to stop it for good. I could feel the weight of her words. The reset hadn't just been a force of nature. It had been a tool, a weapon used to test us, to see how far we could push ourselves before we broke. And the system behind it was still out there, waiting for us to make the wrong move. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air, and the ground beneath us trembled. The walls of the structure seemed to shift, the symbols glowing brighter as the energy around us intensified. Something was happening, something we had triggered, something that had been dormant for far too long. It's starting, Sarah whispered. I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The world was shifting again. Not the resets, the real world. The fabric of reality itself was beginning to warp, as though it were being torn apart and remade in some terrible, unholy design. A massive rift opened in the sky above us, a swirling vortex of black and purple that seemed to suck in the very air around us. The earth cracked, and the ground beneath us began to crumble, as though the very foundation of reality was being unmade. This is it, Derek said, his voice trembling with fear. This is what we were meant to face. I grabbed the key from my belt, its pulse now erratic, flickering like a dying star. I didn't know how to stop this, how to fix what had been broken. But I knew one thing for sure. We couldn't let this system win. Not after everything we'd been through. We have to close the rift, Sarah said, her eyes blazing with determination. The key. We have to use the key. I nodded, a surge of resolve flooding through me. I raised the key, its energy responding to my command. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow brighter in sync with it, as if the ancient structure itself were alive, feeding off the energy of the key. The rift in the sky grew larger, its pull becoming stronger, threatening to consume everything in its wake. The air was filled with a low growling hum, the sound of something ancient awakening, something that had been dormant for eons. "Hold on," I shouted to the others. "Get ready. This is our chance." With every ounce of strength I had, I thrust the key forward, its energy rippling through the air, sending waves of power cascading toward the rift. The ground shook violently as the energy clashed with the force of the rift, the two forces colliding in a burst of light and sound that seemed to reverberate through every fiber of reality. For a moment, there was only blinding light, a flash so intense that it seemed to tear through the very fabric of time and space. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The rift began to close, its swirling chaos slowly dissipating, until it was nothing more than a faint crack in the sky. The earth beneath us stabilized, and the ground stopped trembling. The structure we had been standing in was now whole again, its symbols faintly glowing in the fading light. We had done it. The rift was sealed, but the victory was hollow. The energy from the key had dissipated, and in its place, I felt something dark and heavy settle in my chest. The reset was gone for now, but the system that had created it was still out there, watching us, waiting. "We stopped it," Derek said, his voice filled with disbelief. "We actually stopped it." Sarah's expression was grim. "For now. But this is only the beginning. The system has been disrupted, but it's not defeated. It will adapt, it will change, and it will come for us again." I nodded, my heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. The system was not something that could be destroyed. It was too vast, too ingrained in the very fabric of reality itself. But we had taken the first step in breaking free. We had a choice now, one that we would have to make not just for ourselves, but for the future of the world. "We fight," I said, my voice steady. "We don't stop. We don't run. We keep fighting until the system is destroyed, once and for all." And with that, we walked into the unknown, prepared for whatever came next. Because we knew one thing for sure. The battle was far from over. The reset had been just the beginning. And now, the real war was about to begin. The days that followed felt like a strange kind of limbo. The world had returned to a semblance of peace, but it was a peace that felt like a fragile facade, a calm before an inevitable storm. The rift had closed, and the energy that had pulsed with chaotic power had faded, leaving behind a world that seemed too normal, too still. But every time I closed my eyes, I felt it, the presence, the system lurking just beneath the surface, waiting, watching. It had been tested, disrupted, but it was far from destroyed. The reset was only one of its tools, one of its means of keeping control. And now, we had made it angry. I woke up one morning, the first true morning after the rift had closed, and immediately knew something was wrong. There was no sound. No birds chirped. No wind rustled the trees. The silence was suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. I grabbed my phone, but the screen was blank, as if the device itself had lost its connection to everything. I rushed outside, but the street was empty. The houses stood still like lifeless shells. I called out, but there was no reply. "Where is everyone?" I whispered, my voice barely breaking the silence. Sarah appeared beside me, her eyes wide with unease. She had sensed it too. "It's begun," she said quietly. "The system, it's retaliating." I turned to her, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The reset had been one way for the system to control us, but now, it had unleashed something far worse. It wasn't just trying to keep us trapped in a loop anymore. It was coming for us, directly. A low rumble broke the stillness, and the ground beneath our feet shook. Not like before. This tremor was deeper, more threatening, as if the earth itself was about to tear apart. I reached for the key at my side, but it was cold, lifeless. "Not again," Derek muttered, his voice thick with dread. "Not like this." The sky above us darkened in an instant, swirling with dark clouds that seemed to move of their own accord, as though they were alive. The air grew thick with tension, the oppressive weight of something ancient and powerful closing in on us. Sarah looked up, her eyes narrowing as she analyzed the sky. This isn't just the system fighting back. This is its final form, its true form. What do you mean? I asked, my heart racing as the ground continued to tremble. The system is more than just a series of resets. It's a construct, an entity that exists outside the laws of time, reality, and even physics. It's a network of control that feeds off the energy of the world. And it's not done with us. It's evolving, adapting to what we've done. I clenched my fists. We had triggered something. We had disrupted the system's control. And now it was retaliating. I didn't know how much more I could take, how much more I could lose before we were truly broken. Suddenly, the clouds above us split open with a deafening crack, and from the rift descended an enormous, towering figure. It was a shadow, its form flickering like a broken reflection in a mirror, as if it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. It was humanoid, but its limbs were elongated and distorted, like something born from the depths of nightmare. It hovered above the ground, its eyes two empty voids that seemed to absorb the very light around them. The air itself grew cold, the temperature plummeting as it landed with an earth-shaking thud. "That's it," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with a kind of quiet horror. "That's the system." I stared at the creature, the figure that was both alien and familiar, its presence bending the world around it. It wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just an algorithm. It was an entity, a godlike being formed from the very fabric of existence, and it had come to punish us for our defiance. "Can we stop it?" Derek asked, his voice barely audible. Sarah's gaze never left the creature. "I don't know, but we can't let it continue. We have to try." The creature slowly turned its gaze toward us, its empty eyes locking onto mine. And in that instant I knew that this was no longer about breaking the cycle. This was about survival. The system had been watching us. It had been toying with us, letting us think we had won. But now, it had come to destroy everything. "Fight!" I shouted, the words tearing from my throat. "We fight no matter what." We ran toward the creature, each step feeling heavier than the last, as if the world itself were trying to hold us back. The air crackled with energy, the very fabric of reality rippling with each movement of the system's form. But no matter how fast we ran, no matter how hard we fought, it felt like we were fighting against an unstoppable force. The creature's presence bent the laws of reality to its will. Every attack we made was deflected, every effort to strike it down met with an impenetrable shield of dark energy. "You can't stop it," the system's voice boomed, filling the air with a deep resonating force. "You never could." We kept fighting, even as our bodies grew tired, even as our minds began to falter under the weight of the creature's power. The system wasn't just a force. It was a living thing, and it was punishing us for our attempts to break free. And then in the midst of our battle I saw something. A crack in the air, a faint shimmer, just beyond the system's form. "The key!" I shouted, my heart racing as the realization hit me. The key is the answer. Without thinking, I charged toward the crack in the air, my hands trembling as I drew the key from my belt. The symbols on it flickered to life once more, pulsing with a power I hadn't felt in days. I slammed the key into the crack, and in that instant everything changed. The world around us shattered. The sky cracked open. The creature roared in fury, its form disintegrating into pure chaos. The ground beneath our feet tore open, swallowing everything in its wake. And then silence. The key's energy coursed through me, overwhelming my senses. The world was breaking apart, but this time, I wasn't alone. Sarah, Derek, and the others were beside me, their hands on the key, their energy feeding into it. Together we forced the system back. But we knew deep in our hearts that the battle was far from over. The system had been defeated for now, but reality itself was still broken. And somewhere in the void the reset was waiting. The silence that followed the destruction of the system was deafening. For what felt like an eternity, there was no sound, no wind, no movement, no life. The world around us hung suspended in time, as if waiting for the final judgment. But even in this eerie stillness, I could feel it. The system wasn't gone. It had been torn apart, shattered, but it wasn't finished. It was watching us. It was waiting. I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air burn in my lungs. The ground beneath me was solid, yet it felt as though the very earth was fragile, as though reality itself was on the verge of unraveling. The rift in the sky had closed. The creature that had descended from the heavens was gone, but its presence lingered in the air like a bad dream. Sarah stood beside me, her face pale and drawn. She was staring into the distance, her eyes unfocused, as if she could still see the remnants of the system that had tried to consume us. "It's not over," she said quietly, her voice low and filled with a kind of resigned sorrow. "I know," I replied, my voice just as quiet. "But we did something. We stopped it for now." Derek was pacing behind us, his mind clearly racing. "What now? What do we do? We've faced the system, but it's still out there. It's not going to stop. It'll come for us again." His words hung in the air, heavy with the truth we had all been avoiding. The system wasn't some force we could simply defeat. It was too vast, too integrated into the very fabric of existence itself. And now we were on its radar. We had become its targets. "We don't know how long we have," Sarah said, her gaze flicking between us. "We need to prepare. We need to find a way to destroy the system for good." "How?" Derek asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "How do you destroy something like that?" I could feel the weight of the question pressing down on me. I didn't have the answer. None of us did. We had been thrown into a war with an enemy that existed on a scale we couldn't even comprehend. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't let everything we had fought for be in vain. "We keep fighting," I said, my voice steady. "We keep searching for the weakness. We find the crack in the system, and we exploit it. We don't stop. We can't." But deep down, a voice whispered in the back of my mind, reminding me that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for reality itself. And if we didn't win, the world as we knew it would cease to exist. The moment we had shattered the system, something had shifted. The energy of the key had surged through us, unlocking something deep within the fabric of reality. But that energy had also been a beacon, a signal to the system that we were no longer just pawns in its game. We were its adversaries, and it would not take that lightly. "We need to gather allies," I said after a moment. "We can't do this alone. There have to be others who have seen the system for what it is. People who have been fighting it in the shadows." Sarah nodded. "We need to find them. We need to form an alliance, an army if necessary." The idea of gathering allies was a daunting one. How would we find them? Where would we even begin? The system had done everything in its power to keep us isolated, to make sure we never realized the truth. But now the world had changed. People had seen the cracks. They had felt the tremors of something far darker lurking beneath the surface. We couldn't be the only ones. "We start by searching," I said. "We find anyone who's been affected, anyone who might know something about the system, and we bring them in. We'll need all the help we can get." Derek didn't look convinced. "And what happens when the system comes back? What happens when it retaliates?" "We'll be ready," I said, though I wasn't sure how. "We have no choice." But even as the words left my mouth, a sense of dread settled over me. The system had been watching, and now it knew that we were coming for it. It had seen us struggle, had seen us push back, and it would be ready for us when we returned. We spent the next few days gathering what little information we could find, piecing together the fragments of knowledge that had been left behind by those who had fought the system before us. It was clear that we weren't the first to face this entity, but it was also clear that those who had tried before had failed. They hadn't known enough. They hadn't understood the full extent of the system's power. We needed to learn more. We needed to know everything. Sarah and I spent hours digging through old records, combing through the digital archives for any scrap of information that could give us an edge. We learned about the early stages of the system, how it had been seeded into society, how it had slowly infiltrated every corner of the world, subtly manipulating everything. But nothing in the records suggested how to stop it, how to truly destroy it. But then we found it. A file, buried deep within the archives with only a few cryptic words. The heart of the system. We both stared at the file, our minds racing. The heart of the system? What did it mean? Was it a physical location? A key component? "Is this it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this what we've been searching for?" I didn't know, but I knew one thing. If the system had a heart, it was time to find it and rip it out. The file contained coordinates, a place we had to go. And as I read the last line, my heart sank. Once you find the heart, you will never be able to return. The system wasn't just a force. It was a living organism, and its heart was where the true power lay. We had no choice. We had to go. And we had to be ready to sacrifice everything. The battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. But we would end it. One way or another. We gathered what little we had left. Our resolve, our weapons, and the knowledge that we had uncovered. The journey ahead of us was not one we could walk alone. The heart of the system was more than just a physical location. It was the core, the very essence of the entity that had controlled our lives for so long. And to destroy it, we needed to be prepared for anything. The coordinates in the file led us to an abandoned facility in the middle of nowhere. Hidden beneath layers of encryption, the place was a dead zone, completely cut off from the world. It was as though the system had deliberately erased it from every map, making sure no one would ever find it. We knew it was a trap, but it was our only shot. The journey to the facility took days. We traveled through desolate lands, devoid of life, and the closer we got, the more the air seemed to vibrate with an unseen energy. The world felt wrong, as though it had been twisted by the very existence of the system. Nature was distorted, the skies perpetually overcast, and the ground cracked beneath our feet. As we neared the facility, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I could almost hear the whispers of the system, its presence suffocating, pressing down on us from every direction. But still we pressed on. We finally reached the entrance to the facility, a massive underground complex buried deep beneath the earth. The door was massive, its metal surface etched with symbols I didn't recognize. There was no way to open it manually. We needed to find a way inside, and that meant finding a way to bypass the security. "I don't like this," Derek muttered, eyeing the door with suspicion. "This place doesn't feel right. It's like we're walking into the heart of a nightmare." "We don't have a choice," I replied, my voice steady despite the growing unease in my chest. "This is the only way we end it." We spent hours trying to break through the security systems. Sarah worked on the tech, trying to hack into the facility's mainframe, while Derek and I kept watch for any signs of danger. The deeper we went, the more oppressive the air became. It felt like the facility itself was alive, aware of our presence, trying to keep us out. But after what felt like an eternity, Sarah let out a triumphant shout. "Got it! I'm in!" The massive door creaked open, revealing a pitch-black hallway that stretched far beyond what we could see. The temperature dropped immediately, and I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing in on us from the shadows. We stepped inside, our footsteps echoing in the silence, and the door slammed shut behind us, sealing us in. There was no turning back now. The hallway twisted and turned, leading us deeper into the heart of the facility. The walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, as though they were alive watching us. And the deeper we went, the more the air shimmered with a strange digital hum. "It's here," Sarah whispered, her voice filled with awe and fear. "This is where the system lives." As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn toward something. The heart of the system, the very core that controlled everything: time, reality, and our fates. And I knew that once we reached it, there would be no going back. There would be no second chances. Finally, we reached the central chamber, a vast, cavernous room that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. In the center of the room stood a massive pulsating structure, its surface covered in glowing symbols that shifted and changed with every passing moment. It looked like a combination of organic matter and cold, calculating machinery, alive, yet not alive at all. The heart of the system. It hummed with power, the energy radiating from it like a black hole pulling us in. I felt it in my bones, in the very air I breathed. The heart was alive, but it wasn't human. It wasn't even of this world. It was the system itself, the entity that had manipulated us, controlled us, and erased our memories. And now, it stood before us waiting. "Do we destroy it?" Derek asked, his voice shaking with fear and uncertainty. I didn't know. I didn't know if we could destroy it. I didn't know if we had the power. But I knew one thing. If we didn't try, the system would never stop. It would continue to reset, to control, to manipulate until there was nothing left of us. "We have to," I said, my voice filled with determination. It ends here. It ends now. I stepped forward, feeling the energy of the heart ripple through me. My hands trembled as I reached for the key. The same key that had brought us this far. It was cold, lifeless in my grip, but I knew that it was the only thing that could possibly destroy the heart. I placed the key against the surface of the heart, and the room erupted in blinding light. The energy surged through me, burning my skin, ripping through my mind. It was like every part of me was being torn apart, as though the heart was trying to consume me whole. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The key was pulsing in my hand, vibrating with power, as if it was awakening something ancient and unstoppable. No! I screamed, but my voice was drowned out by the roar of the heart, the sound of 1,000 voices screaming in unison. The heart was fighting back, refusing to die, but I wouldn't give up. Not now. With a final desperate cry, I forced the key deeper into the heart, pushing it past the resistance, past the walls of digital code and energy that were trying to consume me. And then it stopped. Everything went silent. The heart ceased its pulsing. The energy that had consumed the room vanished. The glowing symbols faded, leaving only the cold, lifeless shell of what had once been the core of the system. We had done it. We had destroyed the heart. But as the silence stretched on, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was far from over. Somewhere in the shadows, I knew the system was still watching, waiting, and it would never forget what we had done. But for now we had won. And that was enough. The silence that followed the destruction of the heart was unnerving. It wasn't the silence of peace, but rather the silence of something broken. Something that had once been alive, now reduced to nothing more than a hollow shell. The heart, the core of the system that had shaped our world, was no more. But the weight of what we had done settled heavily on my shoulders. We stood in the center of the room, staring at the empty shell of the heart. Its pulsing energy had vanished, and the overwhelming hum that had filled the air was gone. But even as we stood there, a gnawing fear crept into my chest. Was it truly over? We did it, Derek said, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. It's really gone. Is it? Sarah asked, her voice strained with caution. How can we be sure? I glanced around the room, my mind racing. The facility was still too still. There was no sign of the system's presence. It was as though the entire world had exhaled. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike again. We can't be sure, I said softly, the reality of our situation settling in. But we've taken its heart. It can't regenerate without it. We've taken its heart. But how do we know it won't find another? Derek's question echoed in the chamber. I turned toward him, unsure of what to say. The truth was, I didn't know. We had done the impossible. We had destroyed the core of the system. But in doing so, we had broken the very fabric of reality. Everything was fractured, and I had no idea what would happen next. The system was a part of everything, of time, of space, of the world itself. Without it, would everything just stop? There's no way to know, I replied finally. But for now, we have to believe that we've won. The system is gone. We've ended it. The words felt hollow even as I spoke them. The system had been a shadow over our lives for so long. And now that it was gone, it was like a piece of me was missing. What would the world be like without it? Would everything return to normal? Or would the scars we had left behind continue to haunt us? I looked at the others. They were all silent, their faces reflecting the same uncertainty that gnawed at me. We had saved the world, but at what cost? We should go, Sarah said suddenly, her voice trembling. We don't know what's going to happen next, but we need to get out of here. This place feels wrong. We're not supposed to be here. I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. We had destroyed the heart, but there was still so much we didn't understand. We needed answers, and we needed to find them before the world slipped further into chaos. As we made our way out of the facility, the strange energy in the air seemed to lift slightly, but the world around us was still eerily quiet. The skies were dark, but there was no storm, no lightning, no sign of the system's influence. It was like we were standing on the edge of an empty void, waiting for something to emerge from the darkness. We didn't speak much as we left. The weight of our actions hung between us, heavy and unspoken. We had destroyed the system's heart, But we had also destroyed something else. We had shattered the illusion of our world, our reality. And now the question remained, what came next? As we stepped out into the open air, I glanced back at the facility. The place was crumbling, its walls falling apart as though it had never been real at all. The ground trembled beneath us, and I could feel the world shifting, reorienting itself around the absence of the system. And then it happened. A flash of light. It wasn't the brilliant, blinding light of the heart's destruction. It wasn't a burst of energy or a violent explosion. It was softer, subtler, like the flicker of a dying star. I turned to the others, my heart racing. Did you see that? They nodded, their faces pale. What was that? Derek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't know, I said, my mind spinning. But I have a bad feeling about it. Before we could react, the ground beneath us shook again, this time more violently. The air crackled with electricity, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. And then from the distance a figure emerged. It was the man in the black coat. I froze, the blood draining from my face. He had been watching us. He had always been there, lurking in the shadows, a part of this nightmare from the very beginning. But this time, he wasn't just a presence on the edge of our vision. This time, he was here, standing in front of us, his face hidden beneath the hood of his coat. You thought you had destroyed it, the man said, his voice low and cold. But the system never dies. It adapts. It evolves. And you are its new heart. I felt the words like a punch to the gut. The system had never truly been defeated. It had only been waiting for the right moment to return, waiting for us to fall into its trap. And now, it was using us, manipulating us, turning us into something far worse than we could ever imagine. The man in the black coat stepped forward, his eyes glowing with a faint, unnatural light. You've only just begun to understand the true nature of the system. But don't worry. I'll teach you. I'll show you what it means to be part of the real world. As he spoke, the air around us grew thick with an oppressive energy. The world was warping again, shifting, as if the system was remaking itself, using us as its foundation. But we weren't going to let it win. Not this time. With a final, determined breath, I stepped forward, ready to fight for the last shred of freedom we had. The war wasn't over. It had only just begun. The man in the black coat stood before us, his presence radiating a cold, ominous energy that seemed to warp the very air around us. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the oppressive weight of the system closing in, suffocating us. You think you can stop it, he said, his voice almost amused. But you've only given it new life. The system has been waiting for someone like you to break it open, to crack its shell. And now that you have, it's going to consume you, like it consumed everyone before you. His words cut through the air like a blade, and I could feel the truth behind them. We had been so focused on destroying the heart, on ending the system, that we hadn't realized what it truly was. The system wasn't just a machine. It was a living entity, an intelligence that had been growing and evolving in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now it had us. The ground trembled beneath our feet, and the sky above us seemed to darken, as if the world itself was being swallowed by the system. The man in the black coat stepped closer, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. You've only begun to understand the nature of the system, he continued, his tone cold and detached. But there is no escape. The system is eternal. It will always find a way to survive. And now, it will use you as its vessel. I could feel the energy building around us, thick and suffocating, as though the very world was being rewritten. My mind raced. We had to stop this. We had to fight back, or everything we had done, the sacrifices, the pain, the destruction, would be for nothing. We're not your puppets, Sarah said, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. We won't let you control us. The man in the black coat smiled, a twisted, knowing smile. You already are. You've always been. With that, the world shifted again, and the air around us grew even colder. The system's presence was closing in, tightening its grip on us, and I could feel its influence, like a weight pressing down on my mind. But I refused to give in. We don't have to fight it, I said, my voice steady despite the panic rising in my chest. We can choose to break free. The man in the black coat laughed, the sound cold and hollow. You think you have a choice. You are part of the system now, whether you like it or not. And when the system chooses its new heart, it chooses those who are willing to embrace it. Suddenly, the ground beneath us cracked open, and a blinding light erupted from the fissures, engulfing the area in a flash of white. I shielded my eyes, and when the light faded, everything around us had changed. The facility, the barren landscape, everything was gone. We were standing in an endless void, surrounded by darkness. There was no sky, no ground, no horizon, just the void stretching on forever. The man in the black coat stood before us, his figure growing larger as he advanced. His eyes glowed brightly now, filled with an alien intelligence. "Welcome to the true world," he said. "This is where the system begins." The void around us began to pulse, and I could feel the presence of the system. No longer a shadow in the background, but a tangible force, alive and conscious. It was everywhere, all around us, in every direction. I could feel it trying to take hold of me, to rewrite my mind, to bend me to its will. But I resisted with everything I had. I couldn't let it win. I couldn't let it take control. "Fight it," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We can't let it win." The man in the black coat chuckled. "You still don't understand. You're not fighting the system. You are the system now." With that, the void seemed to crack and shift, and I felt myself being pulled into the darkness. It was like being sucked into a void, my very being unraveling as I was drawn toward the center. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the pull. But it was useless. The system was too strong, and I could feel myself slipping. Then, just as I thought I was lost, I heard a voice. It was faint at first, a whisper in the distance, but it grew louder with every passing second. It was familiar, Sarah's voice. "Hold on," she called. "We can still fight." Her voice was a lifeline, and I reached for it with everything I had. I wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not after everything we had been through. The darkness around me started to crack, the system's hold weakening. And then, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A light, brighter than anything I had ever seen, shining in the distance. "Go to the light," Sarah shouted. "We can escape together." The light grew brighter, and the darkness around me began to unravel piece by piece. I pushed forward, using the last of my strength to break free from the system's grip. And then I stepped into the light. The void disappeared, and the world around us shifted once again. This time it was different. The oppressive weight of the system was gone. The sky above us was clear, the ground solid beneath our feet. We were free. The man in the black coat was gone, and the system's influence had faded away. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I could breathe. But as we stood there in the newfound world that had been born from our struggle, I couldn't help but wonder, had we truly escaped? Or had we simply moved to a new level of the system's game? The answer was unclear. But one thing was certain, we had taken the first step toward freedom. And that was enough. For now, the world around us felt unfamiliar, even though everything seemed the same. The ground was solid, the air crisp, and the sky, clear for the first time in what felt like forever, stretched above us, vast and unending. The oppressive weight of the system was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play, something lurking just beneath the surface. We had fought so hard to destroy the heart, to tear down the system that had shaped our world. But now that we had won, the victory felt hollow. The man in the black coat was gone, but the questions remained. Was it truly over? Was this freedom, or was it another illusion? I looked around at the others. Derek, Sarah, and I were standing in the middle of a field, surrounded by tall grass that swayed gently in the wind. They were staring at the sky, their faces painted with the same uncertainty that weighed heavily on my heart. "What now?" Sarah asked quietly, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. "I don't know," I said, my own voice heavy with doubt. "I thought I knew what we were fighting for. But now, I don't know what this is. Is it really freedom? Or is this just another level of the system's game?" Derek shifted uncomfortably. "What if this is just the beginning? What if we've only scratched the surface?" I nodded. "That's what I'm afraid of. We destroyed the heart. But the system was alive before it. Alive in the way the world was constructed, in the way we all lived. What if the system isn't just a machine or a force? What if it's a part of us? There was silence for a long moment as we each processed that thought. The system had shaped our world, our reality, for as long as we could remember. It wasn't just a force beyond us, it was in everything we did. In the choices we made, the paths we walked. In the moments we lived and the memories we held. What if we were never meant to escape? Sarah whispered. What if this was always going to be our fate? The thought hit me like a lightning strike. The system hadn't just controlled our world, it had controlled us. And by breaking it, we might have simply chosen a new path, a new iteration of the same story. Maybe we don't have a choice, Derek said softly, looking at the ground. Maybe this is just who we are now, part of the system's design. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. But deep down I couldn't accept it. I couldn't believe that after everything we had done, we were simply pawns in a never-ending game. We had fought for something real, something worth fighting for. There had to be a way to truly break free. And then, as if the universe itself had heard my thoughts, the ground beneath us began to tremble once more. At first it was subtle, almost unnoticeable, but within seconds the tremors grew stronger. The sky above us darkened. The air grew thick with the familiar, oppressive presence of the system. No, I whispered, feeling my heart race. It can't be. Not again. The ground cracked open in front of us, and a deep, resonant voice echoed from the depths. It was the voice of the system, familiar, cold, and unyielding. You have destroyed the heart, the voice said, its tone filled with both mockery and admiration. But you cannot destroy me. I am not the heart. I am everything. A dark shadow began to rise from the cracks in the earth, a swirling mass of energy and light. It grew, expanding like a living thing, pulling everything into its gravitational pull. The sky darkened further, and the wind howled, carrying the weight of the system's presence. I could feel it, the system coiling around us, like a serpent preparing to strike. What do? Sarah cried, her eyes wide with terror. We fight, I said, the words coming from some primal place deep inside me. We've fought this far. We can't stop now. The swirling darkness loomed closer, and the voice of the system rumbled again, as though laughing at our defiance. You think you have a choice, the voice mocked. You are my creation, my children. There is no escape. There never has been. I took a step forward, determined not to let it consume us again. The system had always tried to manipulate us, to control us. But this time, I refused to let it win. I looked at my friends, Derek, Sarah, and I knew that this was our last chance. I don't know if we can win, I said, my voice steady. But we have to try. If we don't, then we'll never know if we truly had the power to choose. The energy from the system surged, filling the air with an overwhelming sense of dread. But we were ready. We had fought against the system's control before. And now, we would fight for our freedom one last time. The swirling mass of energy continued to grow, its tendrils reaching out, trying to envelop us. But this time we wouldn't give in. We wouldn't let the system consume us. We had a choice. And this time, we would make it count. As the darkness closed in, we raised our hands to the sky, our collective will converging into one final defiant cry. Not again, we shouted in unison. And then, everything went black.